Hello, this is Connor Stoops and welcome back to another Lumion Legacy HTUC video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Wresolen. Wresolen has proved itself to be a very compatible Lumion on a lot of OU teams, specifically because of its new moves that it got in the last day. And of course, we're going to be going over its counters and checks and teammates in order to know how to use Wresolen in your matches, as well as knowing the roles and sets in order to team build around Wresolen, so you guys can get to know how to use and counter Wresolen. So the role that Wresolen plays doesn't really change much ever since it did get these buffs. However, I will be going some new things that I do want to mention. First off, Wresolen is not just a Lumion with a pretty bad range attack stat and a pretty bad energy stat. It does have a decent speed tier, speeding most walls, and then of course a pretty good HP and melee defense stat. This is on par with a bunch of walls or bulky Lumions in this metagame, and this puts Wresolen in a pretty solid tier for taking melee hits, and this will be utilized later in today's video in the set section. And then of course you do have your classic 130 melee attack. Because it doesn't really have a lot of coverage, specifically its stab coverage, we won't be talking about that, so we'll just be getting straight to the roll. It's very obvious that this can be a very good offensive threat when utilized correctly. This levels of damage, especially with its ability, is on par with a lot of melee wall breakers, and of course due to its bulk it does have the ability to actually tank hits and utilizes its role to be a defensive Lumion on a lot of teams. However, this is still pretty revenge killable because of its 78 base speed. Pretty much most offensive Lumions nowadays are going to be outspeeding you, so you're going to have to try and keep that in mind when you're going to be using Wresolen. So the first set that I will be going over is a wall breaker set. This is going to be utilizing Ace and Aggressive. I would really suggest Ace because your Brawler Stab, while it is boosted by 25% for your stab bonus, having Ace just makes your Brawler Stab hit a lot more harder. Aggressive is definitely an ability that you can try to use. However, due to a lot of teams having a lot of offensive Lumions that just outspeed you, even if they're not like general cleaners, your aggressive ability won't really be turned into a sweeping threat, especially because you're not really the fastest thing in the world. So in my opinion, Ace is a lot more consistent and you'll get a lot more value out of it. Your personality is going to be very brawny, tender, clumsy. This is so you can just hit as hard as possible without sacrificing any other speed. Speed, of course, is something that you do want to keep, and then nimble can help you outspeed some niche Lumions. However, pretty much everything above you runs nimble, so this personality of brawny nimble isn't going to be the best. And of course, just hit as hard as possible with your Ace ability. That's the main goal of this personality. Your moveset of choice is going to be Rogue Assault because you want to take advantage of your Ace ability and hit as hard as possible. Bulk Up because this is your best boosting move. Until we get like Brawn Boost or something, or Drudge, Bulk Up is going to be the move you want to use. And then Electro Punch is needed here as we do want to make sure we KO some metal types that originally can live our Rogue Assaults. And then our Frost Punch here is going to be for specifically plant types. You can try and run Fire Punch here because it does help you out with Tatab and Vesperatu, two Lumions you can't hit super effectively. However, for the Tatab matchup, you will be running Ace, so Rogue Assault will just KO it anyway, even if Tatab is not chipped. And then of course, it really just narrows it down to Vesperatu and a few others which aren't really that meta relevant to be running Fire Punch. So Frost and Electro Punch are going to be the moves left. And then of course, moving on to your item, Brawler Essence, it's really a no-brainer here. You can try and use like an Electric or Frost Essence, however, those essences aren't really that worth it because Brawler Essence allows you to just hit as hard as possible. And of course, going on to the TPs. 40 energies to use 2 of your punching moves, the Electro or Frost Punch, and then 2 Bulk Ups, and then 2 Rogue Assaults. This is pretty solid. If you do not want to use that move order, you can of course just use for Rogue Assaults, that pretty much does it for you. Your HP is the leftovers, and your 200 melee attack and speed is to max out your more important stats as much as possible. You can drop speed to go into your HP because there's not really a lot of Lumions in your speed tier that you can try and outspeed. However, one thing I do want to mention is that if you do bulk up once on the Obsidian swapping in, you can 2-hit KO it, with Rogosol. Even if Resilience procs, you're still going to be able to just KO Obsidian in that range. So if the Obsidian player knows what they're doing, they're going to be forcing to sleep after you hit them, which does give you some ways to make counterplay by swapping to an Obsidian killer or just setting up your own bulk ups, which can be pretty dangerous. Other than this, we do have a bulky melee defense set, as I've said, and this is going to be utilizing the ability Ace or Ignorant. Of course, Wresolen, we may or not know whether it's going to be in the OU metagame, so Ignorant is going to be utilized in more lower tiers such as UU and NU. Ignorant actually helps a lot as it does stop a lot of setup sweepers down in UU such as Terradescent, Avatros, and it can even potentially stop some cleaners in the OU metagame such as Akalos and Tatab, which really doesn't surprise a lot of people, but it does surprise me. And then of course your ability can still be Ace, as you still want to one-hit KO Tatab with Rogue Assault. However, that's just niche matchups, and this is mainly for Wresolen in more lower tiers, if you do want to use a more bulky melee defense set. Birdie personality is going to be brawny, robust, very clumsy. Don't sacrifice his speed or melee defenses, just run brawny robust so you can have better matchups on the melee defense side. Your moveset is going to be Rogue Assault as always, so you still hit as hard as possible. Bulk up, of course, we want to take advantage of our matchups, and then Frost Punch is going to be required here, as we do want to stop setup sweepers such as Avatros down in UU. And then you can have a choice of between Electro or Driving Force. Driving Force will help stop these Lumians from setting up on you, just driving them, forcing them out, make sure their boosts are gone, and then that's for Electro Punch. It is for some metal types. However, most metal types down in UU, with the exception of Maraith, you do hit super effectively, so that's pretty much it. And then of course, Health Amulet or Milkshake, we want to sustain as much HP as we can, as we do not have recovery. And then RTPs. RTPs are very simple. You just want to run 200 melee attack and melee defense to tank as much as possible. Your speed tier here does outspeed a non-sluggish 0 speed Stratosaur, so that does help you out there. And then your 40 energy, same calc as before, and your 28 melee attack are just leftovers. So with that out of the way, let's get right onto the counters and checks and teammates for Wresolen. So offensive and defensive counters and checks for Wresolen are of course very simple. You just want to run Lumians that can just hit it super effectively and cancel out its Brawler stab. Of course, using Spirit types is traditionally the best way to stop Wresolen, as Vesperatu and Your Soul are the best Lumians at this. Your Soul, especially with Terrifying, is just so good. And as for Vesperatu, you do have to watch out for Frost Punch or especially the Blaze Punch. However, because of how new Wresolen is to a lot of people, it's most likely not running Blaze Punch, so you will have to watch out for Frost Punch. And of course, both of these Lumians can win the 1v1 against Wresolen. Other than that, you do have Casimir Unleashed or Casimir Cracked to use as bulky Mind-type Lumians. You can use other Mind-type Lumians such as Odayaga or Ferroglyph. However, one of them, specifically Ferroglyph, has really bad melee defense if you're not running Idiosyncratic. And if you are running Idiosyncratic, then Wresolen is just going to bulk up along with you. And then as for Odayaga, you do have to watch out for Electro Punch, so you do have to watch out for that. And then as for Casimir Unleash and Casimir Crack, they're just bulky mind types. And of course, use anything that can just outspeed Wresolen, as its speed tier is pretty bad. As long as you're just predicting what move it's going to come next and going into resist, that's the main ways of stopping it. And then of course, defensive answers, Spirit types such as Your Snack or Harvest have always been the best answers for Wresolen. And then Barblast or Your Soul are also other options. Barblast doesn't really care if Wresolen tries to set up on it, because it still does tank the Rogue Assault even if Wresolen bulks up on the swap, and then it does have the ability to 2-hit KO with Toxablast. And as for Your Soul running bulky or not is just going to be able to stop it in its tracks. As for your offensive cores, this is going to be a very simple section here, because there are not a lot of answers that you can try and pair up with Wresolen. Wresolen kind of just exists on its own, but using light type Lumians or ancient type Lumians can help Wresolen out for the spirit types. Wresolen and Arceros is especially a good core that I've noticed, especially in UU, as there's not pretty much any melee walls that can wall both at the same time. So this melee synergy is pretty good. However, this does of course translate into OU, where Nova Diaz is just the better version of Arceros, and then as for Draygadon, Draygadon just has the best matchups and out of all of them against the spirit types such as Your Snack, Harvesect, and Your Soul. I did forget the Nova Diaz is technically UU in a lot of OU tournaments, so Arceros in NU, it's really complicated. Other than that, you can try and running this type of core. Running a light type is traditionally the way to go. Flare spamming Landtorch is very solid, as Landtorch is really one of the hardest hitters in terms of light types and offers itself as a pretty good cleaner. Joltooth is very strong as well, as you can try and double into Your Snack or Harvesect. Really not Harvesect, just mainly Your Snack. This also goes for the same for Barblast or Your Soul, and then you can threaten them by ambushing a damaging move or just setting up with Judge, which that 50-50 for that opponent is really tough to try and do. So with that out of the way, let's get right onto the conclusion. Now, I did forget or to mention defensive teammates on purpose, because Wresolen here doesn't really benefit from a lot of teammates. It's really just an offensive Lumion that likes offensive teams. If you do want to have like a concrete answer, I would just say Your Snack or Dokomori, just one of the pivoters. Luminami also does work pretty well in terms of just predicting in the spirit type moves. Make sure you run Shade Shell on or Shade Pearl on Luminami, and yeah, that's pretty much all I can really say on Wresolen. Wresolen kind of just breaks its own answers now, and that's pretty solid for a Lumion that really doesn't have any coverage for spirit types. So let me know what you think on Wresolen down below. Do you think it's good, or do you think it's still bad? Like the video or subscribe if you want to see more of these type of content. I will make sure to keep doing this whether I like it or not, and then of course remember that Zulong is still a dumpster fire.